Hello everyone, welcome back to the Music Chat. We are in the second week of Advent, progressing towards the third as we record this. And our hymn today is going to be Comfort, Comfort, Oh My People, or Now My People, I guess it is. And I have Pastor Jeff with me today. Barbara will be back after the holidays. And in the meantime, Pastor has agreed to substitute in as my sidekick. And and he just preached on the theme of this hymn yesterday, or Sunday, in the sermon portion of the pre-recorded service, and also the drive-in service. He just preached this text. So we'll let him talk about that a little bit later. Our hymn today involves three very important people who helped bring it to life and send it on into our century. It's a very old piece of music, and Pastor, you want to kick us off today and talk a little bit about Mr. Bourgeois?
Yeah, Louis Bourgeois was a composer, and he was based in Geneva in the mid-1500s, and that was one of the centers of Protestantism. That's where John Calvin was, and then Zwingli was there, and John Knox came there, and others. And so it's the sort of the center of the Reformed side of Protestantism, as opposed to the Lutheran side of the Protestant Reformation. That process included, the Protestant Reformation included it was part of the Renaissance, and therefore included a musical renaissance within the church as well as the larger musical community. And so Louis Bourgeois was part of that process. And he is probably the best known, least known composer in Western Christian music, I would have to say.
Yeah, he's from the 1500s.
Right.
1510 to 1561 are his dates.
Exactly, but you know his music, and not just Comfort, Comfort, Oh My People, or Now My People. You might know that tune, but you know his most famous tune, and that, of course, is a tune that's called Old Hundredth, and is the tune by which we sing the doxology. So he is best scholarship can determine he's the one who composed that tune, and so you know it by heart, I'm sure. One of the
most famous melodies in all of Christian music.
And music in general, you would have to say.
Enough.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And so you know his work, but he is not just that. He has done, composed many other tunes. And of course, the one that we are looking at today, he composed.
Well, actually, he wasn't the composer of it. He was the selector of that melody.
Oh,
yeah,
okay.
It's
Very
an anonymous.
Cool.
It's an anonymous composer. It was probably a French folk tune, and he was in the process. He was very close to John Calvin and worked closely with him. Calvin wanted the psalms sung, basically. That was a big thing with him. He wanted all the psalms in the service to be sung. And so Bourgeois was the main guy that he worked with to compile and compose. He compiled some melodies and he composed others.
Right.
This one was one that he found to match with Psalm 42.
And must have adapted it to a certain degree.
That's right.
Yeah.
As is always the case.
Yeah.
And so it's a very old melody. I think one source put it maybe in the 15th century, the actual melody. But of course now he's in the 1500s. and it could even be older than that. We don't really know. But he found the melody, put it with Psalm 42, which that psalm is the deer coming to the water. As the deer pants.
As the deer pants, okay.
Yeah, it's that text. And so it's a different kind of text than we're talking about today. And we'll talk about maybe how the tempo might have been different, and when they sang it as a song.
Right.
Than when we sing it as a hymn today. So that's how it got started. And in the Geneva Psalter that he put together, which was a major, major collection, that has kind of, we even refer back to it even in today's day. They still talk about the Geneva Psalter from John Calvin's time. And so this publication was the springboard of all of the hymns. They were published with just single line. They were not published with harmonies.
Right.
Because
Calvin didn't like the harmony.
so he didn't even, his harmonization, if he had one, is not the one we know. There was some other people through the years many people have harmonized it.
Right.
And so taking from all these different harmonizations, this is the one we loosely use today when we play it in church. But that's where the melody actually came from. So now we move ahead and and just a funny thing with before we leave Bourgeois, he was imprisoned for a while because he was a controversial person in his time period. He would take melodies and sometimes change them without asking anyone, or without asking permission from the original composer or whoever had the copyright, even in this time period, if you can imagine. And they threw him in jail. And guess who bailed him out? John Calvin.
Of course.
So if you're friends with John Calvin, you get a second chance, I guess. But anyway, so the melody comes first, and now we move ahead to the 1600s.
Yeah, and that's a very common process, where the melody's actually quite a bit older than the song by which we are familiar with that combination of the text and then the tune. Very often the tune is older than the text and was composed for a different purpose, or comes from folk tunes or so on. And then, of course, many of the music chats that we've done, the text has had several different tunes associated with it.
That's right.
And so, and with this one, once again, that's the case, because then about 100 years later, the next century, the Protestant Reformation is now maturing into its first century of work, and we're getting ready for music to really begin flourishing within the Protestant movement. We've got folks like Buxtehude, and we're getting ready for Bach and all those folks, and so in steps this guy. And
those were two good Lutherans.
Right.
And here comes another. I was not familiar with this gentleman before the chat, but I feel like I should have been, because he's a tried and true Lutheran. He came from a Lutheran family, and all of his father, his brother, 2 nephews, and 5 sons all were theologians or ministers,
right,
or Lutheran ministers. And here's a funny thing about him. We got the one guy who was thrown in jail. Well, this guy named all of his 5 sons Johann, with different middle names. That's kind of a common thing back in this time period.
Apparently.
It makes you think that they have T-shirts, Johann 1 and Johann 2. I don't know, but how that worked. But those are not who we're talking. We're talking about Johannes Olearius, and he was born in 1670. Or I'm not sure if he was born in 1671 or if that's when this hymn came.
No,
along.
I see. He was born in 1611.
There we go. So the 1671 date that I have in my notes is when we're talking about when he wrote this hymn text.
And therefore, he was born almost exactly 100 years after Bourgeois.
Right. and was working the work on the Psalter was in 1551. So Olearius's work was 100 plus years
Right.
later too on the actual. Their careers sort of paralleled in time span, I guess you could say. But he was a hymn writer. He was a court chaplain, a professor of philosophy, and he also authored a very important work on commentary about the Bible.
Right.
But he's most known as a hymn writer.
Right.
And so this was published, this hymn, and when we say hymn, we're not talking about the music part.
Right.
Talking about the text part. And it was an important German hymn book of the 17th century. And it was written for a June church festival involving John the Baptist.
Right. Yeah, the feast day of John the Baptist is in June. So
Right.
it's almost exactly, it may even be June 25th. I'd have to go look it up. It's almost exactly 6 months before Christmas. And so, John the Baptist was born before Jesus, but he had that family connection, that they were cousins to each other. And so when Mary went to visit Elizabeth, the mother of John the Baptist, when Elizabeth was more along in her pregnancy, 6 months along, Mary still felt Jesus stir within her when they came into contact with each other, when Jesus felt the presence of John. And so the feast days are almost exactly 6 months apart then. So.
Well, and the reason you and I can know this hymn is because these were famous works in their own time period in their own countries.
Right.
But here, as an American, an English-speaking person, we depended upon the translator to make this available to us, and she's actually a huge figure that we talked about once or twice earlier in some of the chats. Her name is Catherine Winkworth. She was from London, and she spent some time in France as well, died in France, I think. She was an English scholar and educator. She translated many German hymns to English, including Now Think We All Are God.
Yes, yeah.
And Comfort, Comfort.
A Mighty Fortress.
Mighty Fortress, although we don't use her translation. But some big German. Oh, Sacred Head was one that she translated.
Yeah.
And so she was huge in allowing the expansion of the use of German hymns in both England and then later here in America. She was a great figure. She fought for women's rights.
Yes.
Was promoted higher education for women. Yet she was humble and, just she was a smart lady and knew how to use her wisdom wisely.
Yeah, she was, of course, fluent in both English and German. And
I think she lived in Dresden
right.
part of her life.
And maybe even had family that was German.
I think it says something, she lived there with her mother for a while when she was younger,
And so she had a particular gift for being able to take the German words and with their meter and with their rhyming pattern and being able to translate that into English, keeping both the meter and preserving the rhyming pattern, but most of all, most important, preserving at least the sense of what was being conveyed by the German words, being able to convey the same thing in English. And that, I can't even imagine how hard that must be.
And they say that there is always, of course, a little bit of loss between the original language and the translated language, but her translations were so popular and good, and they were quality translations. And so we're just really thankful to have had her open the door. So, we wouldn't have this hymn without her.
Well, absolutely.
Yeah.
And
she's almost as important or as relevant as the melody writer and the text writer. That's why we talk about her,
right.
In the same chat. She's really almost as relevant that it was able to travel and grow and come to other places.
So Bourgeois was in the 1500s.
Yeah.
Then 100 years later comes
Olearius.
and then 200 years after Olearius, then comes Catherine Winkworth, and then now we're about 150 years past that. And so this process, this 500-year process and collaboration over time has produced a tremendously beautiful and very powerful hymn that unfortunately we don't have the occasion to sing very often because it is so tightly connected with the season of Advent. And of course, Advent's the shortest season of the church year. It's only 4 weeks long. And so if we're going to keep to singing Advent carols only during Advent, we only have 4 weeks to get them in. And so comfort makes the cut because it is so connected to John the Baptist, the description of his ministry out of prophecy. And so whenever we get to the second and third Sundays of Advent where we really focus on John the Baptist, then we have the occasion to sing this tune. But, you know, going back to the connection between Olearius and Catherine Winkworth, Olearius wrote hundreds of hymns, but really the only one that today in English-speaking Lutheran churches or even English-speaking Protestant churches that we're familiar with is Comfort, Comfort, which is tragic in a way, but that's very common though. I mean, most of the people that we have covered on Music Chat, or a lot of them, they have been very prolific writers of hymn tunes and hymn texts and so on, and yet, and so maybe within a generation, people knew dozens of their hymns, but then you start going after that, and then they start dropping off, and then you might just have one or two that survive kind of public or general awareness. And so one of the contributions that Winkworth has been able to do is, because her translations were so good, it has preserved some of these hymns that otherwise may have just been completely forgotten.
Yeah, to me it makes it even more of a privilege to be able to sing it and play it and feel, like I said last week with O Come, O Come, Emmanuel, when we sing some of these older hymns, it's like we're so connected. We talk about the world being, you know, small in a way. Time is small too. I mean, here we are 500 years later, connecting to people who lived hundreds of years ago.
Right.
You know, and they're all connected as well.
Yes.
There's this chain of connection that moves through time as God moves through time.
Yes.
You know, and we're still waiting. We're still expecting. You know, I'm drawn to a hymn that starts with the word comfort, comfort, now my people. Who can't be enthused about singing that, you know, in our lives with what we deal with, you know, this is why we come to these hymns.
Right.
And such a privilege it is to have that connection with our past, to have in common the sense of waiting and expectation.
Right.
It's humbling to me. It's so humbling.
It is. And it's a privilege. It's just a privilege and an honor. And so part of the reason we do Music Chat, the series, is to allow others to kind of get a glimpse of how special it is to be able to sing. And even if we can't sing it well personally, to have a deeper appreciation for the real spiritual journey and struggle that these writers of these hymns went through, and that then is expressed in the words that they share.
Yeah, and they're many times set in their own historical context of what's going on historically.
Right.
You know, French revolutions and things like that, you know.
Or the
going
30
on.
Years' War, like a few weeks ago.
All kinds of things, yeah, so that inspire people for different reasons. But I did want to, before we end the chat, I did want to just mention a little bit about the music itself, which I think has helped make it so popular
Right.
for Advent. In addition to the text, when we talk about the melody, it's very Renaissance, and we talked about this before, that Renaissance composers treasured the dance forms. And the music had a light quality. Usually songs like this had a faster tempo.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that makes this very special and melodically and rhythmically is its use of this thing we call a hemiola rhythm. And so Comfort goes along and it starts out in a triple. Music does one of two things. It either has a triple meter feel or a duple meter feel.
Okay.
So the first measure is, and we measure as not really even the right, because we weren't using measures in this time period, but it kind of has this 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3.
Right.
Now, I'm going to sing the next part. 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. Now it feels like it's in duple. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. And then it goes 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2.
Yeah.
So it goes back and forth between triple and duple. And that it gives such a movement forward. Da, 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 dee, da, da, da. It just has this dance. It dances. It's very fun to play. It's very fun to sing. It's very fun to orchestrate. The recording, we have 2 recordings that we're going to put for links, and I hope everyone will listen to them. There is one is a Congregational Choir from Lincoln, Nebraska. They have a phenomenal organist and choir there, and they did this back in 2015 on the second week of Advent, and it's on YouTube, and it's great. And they have a drummer going who kind of goes along with he has this hemiola thing going great. And so watch that. It is just, he's got a tempo. I mean, I've never heard it played so fast. I think it's wonderful, that he's getting away with that.
Nice.
Yeah, so that's one reason I think that we love singing it so much, is this rhythmic thing that goes on all throughout. It has a variety of phrase lengths. A lot of the poetry goes da-da-da-da-da-da, da-da-da-da-da-da. It's very equal phrases. This has some phrases that aren't so equal, which kind of has that off-kilter sort of thing too, that it feels a little maybe out of balance in a way. And then, we talked about the tempo probably was slowed down when Bourgeois used it for the psalm, but I'm quite certain that it was sped back up again in Olearius's time when it got matched up with his text. And, now we probably have split the difference a little bit most of the time.
It's a hymn that can be played both fast and slow because...
it's a thoughtful text.
It is.
But it's also a joyful text.
There's joy in it, but there's also soothingness.
That's right.
And so, it kind of has both, kind of a double... kind of layer of...
It does. You could argue...
A rich emotional
depth.
You
could really almost argue a case either way. And I really almost... It made me smile that this guy just went for it in this...
Nice.
The organist obviously went for a more of a Renaissance feel, when he chose the tempo, which is kind of just fun. But probably here at Grace, I probably wouldn't pick that tempo. But, but I really appreciate it. And we also, in our little arrangement that we wrote for Advent, we use this, and we put that hemiola drum thing in there. Which is a little hard to hear in our recording, but it definitely is something to pay attention to when you sing it. Well, you can tell our enthusiasm for this hymn. I love talking about Renaissance hymns because they're some of the most fun to play and sing and add percussion parts to and whatnot. So You know, it's really been a pleasure to talk about it. I enjoyed so much hearing you speak about this hymn, or not the hymn per se, but the text during the sermon this week. And we'll look forward to the other Sundays of Advent. I know next week it's not a chat that we're having. We're having the choir do the lessons and carols, scripture, you know, scripture lessons being read with carols and some special music will be in that.
Right.
And that will be in place of our chat for next week, and then we'll do one more Advent chat, you know, before the Christmas takes over.
Exactly.
So anyway, thank you, Pastor Jeff, so much for coming in and joining me today on this special Advent chat. So we will see you all. Really, we'll see you in 2 weeks for another chat, and please enjoy our lessons and carols next week.
Yep.
And of course, give a listen to those, the two links for Comfort, Now My People, and enjoy those. And we'll see you next time on the Music Chat.
Yeah, those links will be at the end of the video, and I've included, you'll see that I've included some links, some cards, they call them in YouTube language, linking to the worship service that we pre-recorded, that in which we included this hymn, as well as the lessons on which it was built, and so you can really see how they're connected through that service. So you'll see the link for that as well if you want to dive into that. All right. Well, thank you, Wendy, for having me.
Absolutely. We'll see you next time.
Take care, everyone. Blessings.